Welcome into Extreme Radio, presented by GracePointe Healthcare. Just make sure to book your appointment online at GracePointeHealthcare.com. If you mention you're from 8-Man Extreme, you get $20 off your new patient office visit fee. GracePointe Healthcare, modern medicine the old-fashioned way. Live from the GracePointe Healthcare studios, it's Spencer Tomset, Isaiah Austin. Got a little bit of feedback here from our sound guy, tech guy, Wayne Weathers. Of course, we got later interviews on the show and our Skip the Sensitivity moment. It's going to be a good one today. So we look at last week's games. Not many for the MTAC action. We are going to have several other games this coming week, as the majority of the teams will be active. It's going to be a good one going into this week, but of course we got to recap the games that we saw the last week. Of course, we look at the game that we were at on Thursday. Fantastic game to see between the Lancaster Christian Academy Knights getting their first 8-man football win against the Tennessee Heat, one of the oldest teams in MTAC. So a very interesting final score of 26-14, Isaiah. And we look at how the Heat managed to put up 14, but one of the interesting things is that the score wasn't 100% reflective of what the game was like for the clash between the Heat and Lancaster.
Yeah, I thought Lancaster played a phenomenal game, but I think that the Heat, on the other hand, they couldn't get anything to go offensively, and for the Heat, they're really going to need to figure out some ways to bring the ball down the field before they're going to be able to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we will address later the ejection that we saw in the Heat Lancaster game. We'll get to that later in the show, but it's a really good thing for Lancaster as well. For their first 8-man football game in history, even the PA announcers addressed it there. Enthusiastic PA announcers, I might add again.
Yeah, definitely.
But it was a really great feat for them, as it was their first 8-man football game in their school's history. In the past years, they never expressed that they wanted to go down from 11-man to 8-man. They never showed any interest until we first saw them at the scheduling meeting back in February. And for them to get that first victory off of their 5-loss streak continuing over from 2017, it's got to feel great for them and Coach Bragg.
Yeah, and they made a great transition to 8-man. They had an 8th-grade quarterback. Sadly, he went down, but he seems to be all right. And they got a lot of pieces around him to pick up for maybe the inexperience that he brings. But I thought he played a phenomenal game, and I think Lancaster can only go up from here. And they've already gotten off to a hot start.
Yeah, Lancaster especially, hot start for them, as we'll see them going to right here in Franklin. They'll be going to Franklin Christian Academy next week. We also look at the other scores from Friday night. We'll cover the game that James was at, but we were not at. It was in between the Bowling Green Christian Academy Warriors and the Franklin Classical School Knights. 46-14, the Warriors pulled out the win over the Knights. I know there's some depressed faces on both of your expressions there, but there were obviously, not just in the Thursday game, but in all the games that night. It's expected in the first week because you're getting back into the rhythm. But there was a lot of cramping. There's a lot of injuries, not just in that game, but through the rest of the games that were this past weekend. There's a lot of cramping, a lot of lack of potassium and such, and that seemed to be the case that really haunted FCS.
Yeah, well, FCS had 2 starters on both sides of the ball out of town, and their center and nose guard had a leg injury. So that brought the roster down to 11 going into the game. And when Ernie McKinnon, supposed concussion, Josh Austin, severe leg cramps, and Caden Dickerson, severe leg cramps, made it so they could only put 8 guys on the field, having to stop play because they didn't have enough guys to field even a team to go out there and play. It was a rough night, and hopefully I can see FCS turning this around if they can get their guys healthy. They definitely have a strong roster, but Bowling Green showed again that they have a strong defense, playing against a young athletic team, being able to get stops and hold FCS to 2 touchdowns during the game. I thought that was a big issue the first week, but they seem to have corrected a lot of the things on the defensive side of the ball. So By the way, I'm not sleeping on Bowling Green anymore. That's over. Okay, they're back to proving what I said at the beginning of the year and proving me wrong what I've been saying the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, you said that on the broadcast. You said that a little bit off camera on a ride back from White House when we got that score. But especially look at Bowling Green. I know it's a little bit of a broken record saying, but what Coach John Brown told us is that this is one of those scenarios where they can go 0-3 or they could go 3-0. They're 2-0 right now. They haven't faced any North teams yet. That's next week against the Tennessee Heat. But they have not faced any North teams yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how Bowling Green fares against those teams in the North. But you also have to look, especially at the Warriors putting up 46-14. You have to look at that score and realize this is not the Bowling Green team we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and they started off the game. It was a pretty tight game starting out. Started out 8-6 in Classical's favor. But Bowling Green, after the Classical guys started getting fatigued and stuff like that, they were able to push Holman to the outside and get a ton of opportunities where the Classical guys had no juice left. Whatever they're doing up there at Bowling Green is working with the conditioning. We saw it week 1. We're seeing it now. Those guys are ready to play, and they're going to be tough to beat. And as more teams get conditioned and start to get on the level that Bowling Green's at now, games will start getting competitive, guys able to go 4 quarters, stuff like that. But this hot start and probably going into week 3 with the Heat coming off of a game where they had awful cramping, they have an opportunity to go 3-0 and really set the tone for the rest of the season.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we'll see what happens with Bowling Green going against the Heat as their first in-division game next week. So that'll be interesting for them going forward. And of course, the game that we called from White House, which with the fantastic new press box, everything, we endorsed it on broadcast about the concession stand, but that's not the focus. The focus of what we're supposed to be talking
fans
about.
are the focus.
The fans, exactly. Yeah, the enthusiastic fans.
I'm talking about the ceiling fans.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, it was a cooled press box for once, man. It was fantastic. But 44-6 was the final score for Christian Community against Riverside. The Knights traveling from Fayetteville up to White House, and the Colts just showing their dominance as the defending national champions. They lost a lot of seniors. They lost a lot of firepower. They bulked up on their coaching staff, as we were talking about before the show. Arguably the Golden State Warriors in terms of coaching staff in the Middle Tennessee
Definitely.
Athletic Conference for CCS. And we talked with all of the coaches before the game and such. They seemed really hyped, really ready to go for participating in their first game back for 2017. And just, for CCS to get that first win at home for the season, it was just fantastic for them.
Yeah, and it seems like they definitely reloaded here. We were a little bit skeptical going in. How would the new offense look for CCS? But I think we were definitely pleasantly surprised here. I thought their pass game was phenomenal. That's what I expected. They threw for 3 touchdowns just in the first half, and I just think we were introduced to a new run game after we lost Isaiah Webb from the MTAC. We saw the new 1-2 punch of Jefferson and Daughter, and they look phenomenal. Jefferson got a touchdown in the second quarter, but they didn't have to rely too much on the running game because of how great the passing game was when they got into 3rd, 4th down situations and red zone situations. But Jefferson and Daughter are going to carry a lot of the load this year. Coming from last year, they got some opportunities, but this year's going to be their year.
Yeah, and you also have to look at the other side of the ball, and of course we'll talk about the ejection that occurred in the game later in the show. But you look at Riverside, and obviously they're down to their 2nd string quarterback and went down to their 3rd string quarterback, but their first tackling drill of the year, broke his collarbone, so he's out for almost through October. So it was essentially looking like Riley Hall and John Trahan were carrying the team in a rush-heavy game for the Knights, and it looked like when they scored, the score was 14-6 when they got their first touchdown. It looked like they could have started a comeback from there, but CCS just stood up and decided not to let any of that happen or score even once. But Riverside only scoring 6 points. Is that reflective of who they are?
I think they just ran out of steam. And this team at their peak, with everybody healthy, it is a decent team in the league. I think that they're definitely much improved from where they were last year. But this careless stuff, like a player getting ejected, and then of course the injury to the quarterback, you hate to see that. They're now down to the third string for this coming week. An injury to Riley Hall, we don't know exactly what that entails. I guess we'll see this Friday. And obviously John Trahan. This team is going to be interesting to watch this year. I think CCS, the skill between Riverside and CCS, although Riverside has improved a lot, they just don't have the manpower to make it 4 quarters with CCS.
At least not as of now, but we'll see how if they have the manpower to continue 4 quarters throughout the rest of their games in the season, especially next week against Franklin Classical School. And Christian Community goes into a bye week before going to Mont Juliet for the Tennessee Heat. So we're looking forward to all of those games later. And ladies and gentlemen, as we always say, it's always a privilege and honor for us to have guests on the show to give us more insight around the league, including coaches to help us help make our jobs easier. And we're pleasure to have on today the coach for the technically newest, one of the two newest teams to the Middle Tennessee Athletic Conference as of this year. The Sacred Heart of Jesus High School Knights coach Judd Powers is joining us all the way down from Jackson, Tennessee. So, Coach, I'm hoping that the weather is going well down there because it was storming for us earlier. It looks like Coach Powers having a little bit of technical issues on his end, so hopefully we'll get him up and running in just a moment. Just having some issues on his end there. Let's see if we can get an audible call on this one. So looking at least while we're waiting on Coach Powers to see if we can get him in for the interview. So they are coming off of a bye week going into their next game against Lighthouse, and we'll get to the predictions of the games by James and Isaiah later. We'll see if Judd has his configuration working again. Coach, you managed to get it figured out? And it looks like Coach Powers. There we go. I think I hear something there. You there, Coach?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. It's a little bit muffled, but we can still hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that. I had my earbuds in. It must not have been coming through.
Yeah, no worries, man. So tell us. I mean, I know it was storming earlier. It was giving us a big storm earlier on our way back from White House and such. Has the weather been decent in Jackson?
Yeah, you know what? It's 93 right now according to my car. It's a little cloudy, but it's definitely hot and dry. So I guess you could call it decent for mid-August.
Yeah, and it's been interesting for us. We almost had to stop on the interstate on the way back from White House because it was fairly poor, and we're hoping the weather won't get to that condition for any of the games.
Something out of I Am
broadcast.
Legend.
Yeah, exactly. So let me ask you this. Obviously you guys had your opening game originally scheduled on the road against CCS due to injuries. Tell us a little bit about kind of your guys' status on that. If the guys are doing well enough to be able to or tell us about what the status of those guys who are injured going into your game this week.
Yeah, I've got actually the two guys that we only had about 10 or 11 originally at the Jamboree, and then I had two guys. Two of those guys were guys coming off. They're my baseball guys. One had an arm surgery, so he was unavailable, and the other one had a hernia slash when they got in there, it ended up being broken cracked fibula. So he had to have a leg surgery, so he'll be out for most of the season. They had to take part of his calf out in the process of the hernia, so we're just hoping to get him back by baseball season. However, we did pick up two of our basketball guys when school started, so I got two pretty good athletes off the basketball team, so we're up to 12 now, so we should be good to go, barring any more injuries. We don't have much. We can't really afford to have anybody banked up with injured.
Yeah, it's always good to get more players on your squad. The more, the merrier, especially in 8-man football. So you kind of answered my question, my second question already a little bit, but kind of reiterate. Some of the players you're expecting to perform well going in through the rest of the season. Some of the specific guys you're looking at I think this guy will be good in some clutch performances. I think this guy will be good. That kind of thing.
Yeah, most of our guys are freshmen, unfortunately, which the program's in its infancy as far as new coach, new pro. They had actually thought about folding the programs because, I don't want to down somebody I don't know, but everybody was kind of irritated with the way the program was going with Coach Ashlock, and I don't really know how he was running this program, but it turned a lot of guys away, so there wasn't much participation. So they were actually thinking about shutting it down all the way. But now that we've got it started back up, most of our guys are freshmen and sophomores. I do have one junior that's going to play. His name is Jalen. He's a basketball guy, and he is a phenomenal athlete. He was not at the Jamboree. He's one of those guys we're just going to try to get him the ball in space however we can. I'm not just going to line him up at tailback and hand him the ball 100 times because our line is not big and strong enough to succeed doing that. I'm just going to try to get him the ball in space. But as far as the guys I expect to perform, he's one of them. He'll play wide receiver. He'll play some tailback. And he may even play some quarterback in a wildcat type situation. And he'll definitely play on our defense. And then our quarterback is a freshman who threw 2 touchdowns in that Jamboree, threw 2 really good balls. Jake Kale, I expect big things out of him, especially as he gets older. This year, maybe he'll have his ups and downs, but he played a really good Jamboree. And as long as we can protect him and kind of give him throws that are not NFL type throws, just throwing the guys that should be open, I think he'll be all right.
Yeah, we are looking forward to see how your guys perform going later. Now, let me ask you this: going forward, I'm not sure if you've watched our broadcasts or if you've exchanged film with other coaches up to this point, but tell us a little bit about which team or which teams are you looking forward to facing the most, especially with your first year coaching the Sacred Heart Knights.
Well, we know our first home game is the South Haven game, which is not this week but the next week, and I do know they're really good. We played them in the second quarter of the Jamboree, and they got a lot of athletes, and they can really run. And their quarterback, the little guy, can really play. He's the guy that you can't let get outside the pocket or he'll hurt you. But we look forward to playing them at home. I expect we'll have to play well, or they'll run it all over us. But I don't know anything about most of the guys. We haven't exchanged film with anybody, so I don't know much about any of the teams other than the ones we played in the Jamboree. I know we played Lighthouse this week, and our guys are just looking forward to being on the field. We practiced this will be the 3rd week in a row without playing a ball game. So they're looking forward to hitting somebody that's not their own guys. I know that for sure.
Yeah, and but we're looking forward to you guys' first game, and especially this Friday. Were there any specific thoughts you're giving your guys going into their first game on the road in Antioch this week?
Well, the first and foremost, we're just trying to get in shape because we don't have the numbers to have guys coming in and out. We've got to be in tip-top shape. Or I've got guys that are going to have to play nearly every snap, so on both sides of the ball. So I'm just preaching, look, whatever you can do to stay in shape, trying to eat right, not trying to drink tons of water in this heat. And then just playing their assignments. Don't try to be a hero. You try to be a hero, you're going to leave somebody else hanging out to dry. I think if we can not give up a big play, we can stay in games. That's kind of how the South Haven game and the Jamboree got out of hand a little bit. We gave up too many big plays, and we're not going to be able to afford to do that. We can give up some chunks, but we give up the big plays for touchdowns, we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and we'll be looking forward to seeing your guys' first game on the road against the Lighthouse Christian School Lions this Friday. Well, thank you very much for coming in, Coach. We appreciate your time and such, and look forward to see what you guys have to offer this Friday.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So that was Coach Judd Powers of the Sacred Heart of Jesus High School Knights, their first game of the season this Friday at Lighthouse. So this next segment, we're going to call it Sound Off because quite appropriately our sound guy is going to be giving in his inputs. We are a little bit crunched for time, so he'll at least have some time to give in his inputs of what he's seen. But Wayne Weathers has been working with us. This will be his technically for fourth week. That's right. He's been working with us in about a month now, and he's been giving some good insight behind the scenes and such. But we figured it was time to give him his little segment to give his insights and such. So, Mr. Wayne Weathers with the sound off.
All right. So I've got a couple things. Hold on one sec. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I got a couple things. It's mostly for the Heat in the Lancaster game. The Heat have a great defense, but lack the endurance to play a full four quarters, whistle to whistle. Lots of cramping, and once their 3-star players are out with injuries, pretty much one-dimensional on offense and on defense. Then Lancaster is a great team. They've got to figure out something that works and stick to it. Not keep trying different things when they had a lot of stuff that worked. Defense is great. Just need to stop getting sucked in on the play action and jet sweeps.
So do you think that with Lancaster, with trying the same thing, where do you think that their quarterback Bragg getting injured, do you think that's going to be a big effect into it?
Yes, I think that Bragg will be fine later in the year. Might take a week off, and he'll be back playing as well as he has been. I've already seen that they have some great depth. I mean, their second and third string quarterbacks, I mean, they were amazing. For 3 touchdown passes between the third string and second string quarterbacks. I mean, that's crazy. I saw a lot out of Bragg I like, but I also like the second string and third string quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm. And you think with the Heat's endurance, what's it going to take for them to get to that level of being able to play full 4 quarters?
Hydration, conditioning. I mean, I was a manager at FCS for a while. We completely conditioned our players to the best of our abilities, running probably about 40 gassers a practice, Isaiah.
It got up there sometimes.
Something like that.
I mean, it's just going to be a lot of work and a lot of dedication to get them back up where they are, or where they could be if they actually had players that could not stop cramping or stop injuries.
Yeah, it's always expected within the first week. We saw that in almost every game. Players were going down left and right because of that early cramping. Somewhat of those first game jitters, but also, different factors varying into that with making sure you guys are actually hydrated enough. We
saw it with CCS. CCS only had one guy get injured in their entire game.
He just sprung right up.
And he sprung right back up and ran to his sideline.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm talking about. That's hydration. That's dedication. That's conditioning. The other guys, I've seen a lot of injuries. A lot. I mean, probably about 10 or 15 a game, you'd say, go down with injuries, stopping the broadcast 15 or 20 times for injuries. Also, penalties are a big factor in the Heat Lancaster game. Also, huge thing in the Riverside CCS game. I mean, I think CCS had a first down and 25 or something.
35.
It was a first and 35, yeah.
I mean, that's just unacceptable.
Yeah, and again, you look at how it's the first game for the team, so obviously they're going to work out those kinks in practice. I mean, I know that you managed to catch the film for the Bowling Green FCS game. Were there as many penalties compared to the Bowling Green FCA game to Bowling Green FCS? Did Bowling Green improve on that in penalties?
Surprisingly, there weren't a lot of penalties in that game. There were a few, but I was actually pleasantly surprised with the amount of penalties in that game. It seems like Bowling Green getting a week out of, I guess, their first game. They were able to correct a lot of things, and I thought they played pretty crisply on Friday night. Yeah, so
first game jitters is usually what varies into that. So yeah, you're definitely right though, Wayne. Penalties they could cost you games, and especially in first week games. Fortunately, none of them were in division games, which don't matter as much for seeding for the playoffs. But going forward, they'll definitely for those in division games have to focus, strap down, and make sure those penalties don't happen.
Definitely. I mean, I just saw one of my biggest pet peeves in football, probably about 5 times delay of game. That should never happen.
No.
You should always be out of the huddle in time. I mean, one of them was they were still in the huddle when they called delay of game. That should never happen. You should at least have your guys on the line when you get called for a delay of game. And you should know. You have a clock in your mind. You got to know, like, okay, we got to get out of the huddle and go to the line. We got about 10 seconds, you know?
Yeah.
We see the ref raise his arm and put it down, right? Coaches got to tell him too.
Yeah, they got to notice that for sure. So that's sound off with Wayne Weathers giving his good insight throughout the season. We'll hear from him again next week. So again, skip the sensitivity is the next portion of the show. Just the disclaimer. It's all James's opinions, not reflective of 8-Man Extreme. Just that disclaimer at the beginning so you're aware. And before we get into James's opinions, we do want to convey we were fortunately given statements from so there were ejections in the game in both games that we broadcast. There was an ejection. Preston Sloan was ejected from the Lancaster Heat game. Sloan of the Tennessee Heat. He was ejected for the call on the field was leading with the helmet. And he was ejected from the game. And the statement from head coach Ryan Scott, these are his words. The decision to interpret Preston's actions on the play in question as flagrant or even a foul at all was extremely unfortunate to both Preston and our team. There was never a question that a loose ball was the cause for both players to dive for the ball in an attempt to recover it. Preston left his feet to dive for a loose ball with both arms extended and ended the play foot to foot with number 3 of LCA, Lancaster Christian Academy, which clearly reveals that his intent was to recover the ball and not injure his opponent. The statement says injury, but Scott meant to say injure. The Heat have appealed the decision and are praying for the MTAC board to correct this officiating error so that further harm will not come to Preston and his team. And, of course, on behalf of us with 8-Man Extreme, we do, of course, we appreciate the statement from Ryan Scott and do hope the best decision is made as well by the MTAC board in that regard. And our statement also from Travis Creasy, Crutcher Ezell was tossed from the game for an unsportsmanlike conduct. From what we saw in the film, he threw a punch at another player or threw a quick jab at one of the other players. So the exact words here from Travis Creasy. While we never want to quench a player's competitive fire, there are rules in place to promote good sportsmanship. Crutcher is a vocal and vital leader for our football team, and he knows that what he did is unacceptable and has made it right with me, the other coaches, his teammates, and CCS, Christian Community School. I'm proud of the way he continued to encourage his teammates to finish the game. We look forward to a great year from Crutcher once his time to return comes. So those are the statements from both of them, and we 100% look forward to Crutcher's performance later in the year. We're definitely looking forward to both of them as well. And now comes for James. So hearing those statements and keeping in mind that both schools are, or at least the Heat is appealing their suspension, and Creasy said that Crutcher has made it right with the team and such, and when his time comes, he'll be back in the game. Hearing both of those statements, your thoughts on the ejections?
I don't disagree with either statement. I like both of them. I regarding both of them, I think that the hit on Thursday, it was not malicious. It was not flagrant. It was not intentional. I think could it have been avoided? Yes, but at the same time, when you're in real time and real speed, it's so hard. I mean, we watched the video. He had a second to react. A second is no amount of time at all. So, I think that it was something where it was a bang-bang play. He's going for the ball. I do agree with the officials. I think you have to make that call for 2 reasons. First off, because it's in the NFHS rule book that if there's helmet to helmet, you gotta eject the player. I think also and granted, I keep in mind these are 2 Christian organizations. I think, but kids are kids.
I think James is having technical issues on his end that just cut out randomly on there. So we'll wait for him to come back to give his statement on that. But to reiterate what James said on there, and we actually had our own back and forth on this off of the broadcast of that. The National Federation of High School Sports does dictate, and it's also at the college level for the NCAA. It's also at the National Football League level. Is that any helmet-to-helmet collision that you initiate, whether it's intentional, whether it's accidental, any of that, it's going to be an either immediate ejection or it's going to be an immediate personal foul leading with the helmet. And I believe at the NFL level, if you are ever leading with the head, it's an automatic ejection. I believe they just updated that this year. So that is why that ejection happened, was because of a helmet-to-helmet contact. It's an immediate ejection because of leading with the helmet. And while we're waiting for James to get back here, Isaiah, I mean, you could agree with, was it flagrant? From what the replay showed, it did not necessarily look like it was flagrant. And I can 100% guarantee, at least not just from reading Scott's statement, but from my standpoint on this, I do not think by the replay that I have not seen a case up to this point, nor was the case on Thursday in any way of a flagrant leading with the helmet to injure the other player. I don't think that's what happened, and I think that the ejection is the referees did by the rule book. I think that the appeal with the MTAC board, I believe the suspension will be reversed by MTAC bylaws, but of course that I leave that up to the MTAC board to make their decision on that. But I don't see from the film that we reviewed, I don't see any intentional or flagrant leading with the head there.
No, I don't think it was. He had any bad intent with that play. And I think Coach Ryan Scott is making the right decision by appealing it, because I don't think there's any way that this is going to leave him out for next week. It's unfortunate, but it happened. And if we're having a discussion about whether or not this is in the bylaws to happen or not, I feel like we're not having a moral discussion here. Because morally, we can argue about this all day, whether a player should be thrown out, whether the 1 second the refs should have the right to judge it based on intent. But we're having a discussion on whether the bylaws allow this, and it doesn't. This is a play where he definitely led with the head. It was by the bylaws an illegal hit, but when you give the ref the power to make the decision of he had a sec, it becomes a slippery slope where refs can dictate pretty much life or death for that night, for whether they're out of there, keep playing, no penalty, whatever. That gives refs too much power if you loosen up on those rules. So I think through the bylaws, that was the right that was the right decision to make, as in what the bylaws say. Morally, different discussion, but I'm sure it'll get overturned for next week, because there's no need for suspension because of that.
Now, we're waiting on James still to get his tech equipment back up, just having some issues here. But Wayne, you also reviewed the film, and you were at the game with us for Lancaster and such. But with Sloan's ejection and such, I mean, you just talked about how the bylaws state any leading with the helmet, intentional or unintentional, it's an automatic ejection and such. But your thoughts on the choice for the Heat to appeal this? I do not.
Isaiah remembers. Nate McCord was going after a loose fumble and left his feet and got a personal foul call for that, just leaving his feet.
There it is.
Okay, there's James. We got him back up. I think he just unmuted here. So James, we just stalled for time, waited on you for such. But if you want to continue what your thought process was on that.
My apologies. I just gave my whole explanation about it like for 2 minutes and then realized that it didn't go. Anyways, okay, so the statements from the coaches, I do agree with them. I agree with both statements. I think in terms of the Tennessee Heat situation. And I'd heard a little bit of what Isaiah you said. I don't think it was malicious. I don't think it was intentional or flagrant. I think it's a bang bang football play. And Isaiah, you ought to know this, man. We played. There's times that when you have a split second to do something, you can't just stop on it. It's just like a roughing the passer call. Some people say on one hand, well, he ought to be able to stop and not slam the quarterback to the ground. Well, that's easy for you to say sitting in the stands watching the game or watching it on YouTube or watching it on film or something. That's easy for you to say. But when you're in the moment and you're going for that ball, do you see the other guy going for the ball and wrapping it up? Yes, but your momentum is carrying you to the point where even if now you could try to like jump over him or some stupid stuff like that, and then you're taking a chance on you getting hurt. So do I think it was malicious and flagrant? No. We do now. On the other hand, I do think the officials had to call it the way they saw it. They had to call the penalty, and I'll tell you for two reasons. Number one, because it was illegal. It was illegal. It was a helmet to helmet. I'm not disagreeing with that point. Um, and according to the NFHS rulebook, you have to call it that way. But the other reason I think you have to call it is because you, as an official, have to keep control of the. You cannot let that game get out of hand. I've seen several games get out of hand, and it's when that happens. I blame the officials for not keeping it under control. I think when two teams jot now, I understand these are two Christian organizations. I get that. I know that the coaches are doing their best. There's stand up guys. Those players are stand up players, but we're still human. And I think at some point somebody is going to go, you know what? I'm going to get, even if it's an inexperienced player, he's going to go, you know what? I'm going to revenge that hit. And at that point, it gets out of hand. And then then you've got to try to you got to try to put that fire out. So I agree with them for making that call for two reasons. Now, do we have a system in place to where these coaches can appeal the suspensions and the ejections? Yes. Earlier in the year, I said that I did not like last year how many suspensions and ejections were overturned by the board and by the league. I still think that there's some situations where the ejections should not get overturned. Ipso facto, the Riverside Christian play with Crutcher Rizal. Now, I'm not going to villainize him. I'm not going to throw him into the bus. I think he's a young kid, inexperienced quarterback, threw an interception, and his emotions got the best of him. Did not know how to handle that. He's not a Nathaniel Rowley, a Tanner Brown, you insert, Ricky McDowell, you insert experienced senior quarterback, and they know how to handle themselves after throwing a pick. Even if it's run back for a touchdown and they're blocked for 10 yards, they know how to handle it. But if Creasy was to appeal that suspension and that ejection, I do think that it needs to stand because it was even though he didn't mean harm, he still made a bad decision. And sometimes in life, bad decisions result in us having to pay consequences. So in terms of that, I do think that one should stand. I think that the Tennessee Heat one should get overturned just because I think the board will go back and look at it, and Preston Sloan will be ready for Bowling Green. Crutcher Rizal will sit out this week for the Franklin Classical game, but he will be back later on in 2 weeks or next week for the San Diego Swanee game, which Riverside will definitely need him for that one. But I do agree with both coaches and their thoughts on the ejection.
All right. Well, we're getting a little bit pressed for time here, just at least in terms of the hour mark, so that we could keep it under that way. But I'll get your if you could give. I know it's hard for you to do, but I want to get a brief opinion on. Recently, Manic Stream posted on the social media about people ripping the broadcast and the potential of people taking those down from YouTube and using them for personal study. So just your thoughts on that since that post came out.
It's very frustrating. Very, it's really, in my opinion, it's an immoral thing to do because even without us stating that those broadcasts are I understand it's we're there filming two teams, but it's our broadcast, it's our property. You need permission if you're going to be viewing it, or we put those broadcasts out. We put those broadcasts out for families and for guys to be able to, and for people to be able to keep up with their kids, and keep up with their players and their maybe their grandkid or something to that effect. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so hang on.
He's having more technical difficulties on James's end. We'll get him up in just a
I'm
moment.
here.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So we do it in order. Sorry. Is there an echo on my part?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. We do it so that grandparents and aunts and uncles can keep track of their kids and can see the game.
James having some more.
It's
there we go.
It is frustrating though, whenever you hear about people copying a link and sharing it, or just stuff to that effect. Stuff where it's like that's not the intention, and that's why we take our broadcast and we turn them private as soon as they're done, because that video is now for us to view, or for us to do our studies and to keep track of. We'll release it during the off season, after the season, so people can go back and watch it. But it's very frustrating to pretty much have people, I hesitantly say this, steal the video and the broadcast and the footage. So it's very frustrating. We try to address it, like you said, on our social media, and we just hope that people will do the moral thing, the right thing. Just refrain. If you want film of a game, reach out to a coach. If you're a player, reach out to your coach. If you're a person from another team, or I know coaches are good about swapping film, so reach out to the coach if you want footage for some reason or another. But please don't be ripping. We do this because we're passionate about it. We love to broadcast and cover these games, but don't make it to where it's something that we dread. Just please be.
Not sure if that was a technical issue or if that was the end of the thought process, but that's James's statement on skip the.
No, that's the end.
Yeah, okay, just making sure on that. That's the end of skip the sensitivity. Okay, time for our predictions of the games. If you got your helmet schedule, follow along. Go from top to bottom, and then we will reveal our extreme game of the week. The Kingdom.com extreme game of the week. And first game we've got is Bowling Green Christian Academy. The Warriors host the Tennessee Heat. And it's one of those games that, after seeing Bowling Green for the last two games and then seeing the Heat this past Thursday, Isaiah, it's a really intriguing decision to make, because you've got Bowling Green, who's managed to rack up points quick. You've got the Heat, who has managed to at least hold Lancaster to under 30 points. So you've got some skills in that regard, but I think Bowling Green, it's potential that Bowling Green might have the home advantage here, since the Heat, at least to this point, they've only had one game. But it's difficult for the Heat because they've got two road games back to back. So it's an interesting choice to make between Bowling Green and the Heat.
Yeah, so Bowling Green, although their run defense is great and their deep pass defense is great, they struggle with two things, and that's allowing runners to get to the outside and the inside medium range passes. And what does Bowling Green do? The medium passes and always get to the outside. I think that the Heat's offense is too standstill to be able to keep up with the incredible offense of Bowling Green. Now, Bowling Green's defense probably isn't as strong as Lancaster's was last week. We're probably going to see a better offense from the Heat, but I don't think it's anywhere near enough to keep up with Bowling Green, so I'm going with Bowling Green.
All right, James?
I really do. I have been on the Bowling Green train for 2 weeks. and I think it's because of the opponents that they've had. I think I knew that both of those teams would struggle, but I do have to go with the Tennessee Heat on this one, and I think that the Heat, yeah, they lost Thursday night, but I think that um, I think that they have the ability to beat. Well, I'm taking the Heat on this one. I think they've got the ability to beat Bowling Green. When you mentioned penalties, I did go back and look just to double check, and they ended up having 10 penalties on Friday night, equaling up to 80 yards.
Oh,
So
wow.
Sheesh.
if Bowling Green can't correct those mistakes, then I think that they will struggle, and I think the Heat will pick up the win.
I guess I didn't see after because the video was cut after every play would end.
Yeah.
So I guess I didn't see all the flags.
Yeah, we didn't see all of them, I guess. Yeah, so we got a split decision between Bowling Green and the Heat for this week. Next game that we're looking at is the South Haven Christian School Patriots are back. The defending MTAC champions have their first home game to open the season. They host the Webb School, the fourth place team from last year in MTAC. Who it's a rematch of the semi that we called, Isaiah. That's it's going to be an interesting thing to see. But with Webb, they haven't, as far as I know, I think they just started their practice maybe last week, or they just got back into school, I think, last week, something like that. That's why they don't start a game until later in the year. But they're going against the team that they lost to in the semi. They're going against the team that's won the MTAC championship and has defied all odds. And South Haven has only lost maybe 4 of their seniors. So it's going to be interesting to see how South Haven performs, especially at home, and they're in a new stadium too. So they're in new home stadium turf. So we're gonna see how Webb performs in that. But is it too much of a mystery to predict if Webb has any firepower left?
Well, I think Webb is going to struggle. They lost a lot of great pieces last year. Their quarterback Kilpatrick, their leading receiver Wright. They lost a lot of great pieces, which made the team successful last year. And I think the team that they're going to put forth this year, later on as they learn to play together, they're going to be a respectable team by the end of this season. But because they just started practice, because a lot of the guys don't have any experience, there is no question in my mind that South Haven is going to pull this one out.
James?
I do agree. I think South Haven picks up the win in this one. I think Webb's going to struggle this year, and I think South Haven just reloaded. So I've got South Haven as well.
So both on the South Haven side for this week, and we already covered Bowling Green hosting the Heat. The next game we have on the helmet schedule here is Lighthouse Christian School hosting the Sacred Heart of Jesus High School Knights, and we don't really know about either of these teams because Lighthouse, they decided not to do a jamboree this year. They backed out. They decided not to do a jamboree, and they've had 2 weeks off from where the other schools have had their participation. And Sacred Heart, they were going to play CCS. They dropped out due to injuries, and they have also had 2 weeks off to practice with their guys. So with Lighthouse, we don't really know what to expect from them. Sacred Heart, we have a little bit of an idea based on the Jamboree film, so it's going to be a tough one to pick.
Yeah, it really is a tough one to pick. You know, Lighthouse going into every season, it seems to be always confusion on what they're going to be able to produce. And most of the time, it turns out that Lighthouse actually has a pretty good team. They've made the postseason quite a few times. The only seasons that they've struggled necessarily is when their numbers have been down. So from what we know from Sacred Heart numbers-wise, I think we're going to be in for a good game, but I'm taking Lighthouse on this one.
James? James again having some technical issues on his end. Just James, you got it. You got it up.
Guys, I've got Sacred Heart on this one, and I'll tell you why. Because I like what I saw out of the Jamboree. I think that even with as good as South Haven is, they hung in with South Haven for at least the first little bit, and they were able to pull away due to lack of depth for Sacred Heart and South Haven having some extra guys. But I think Sacred Heart pulls this one out.
Split down the middle on that. The Christian Community Colts have a week off before they go into a 6-game-in-a-row streak. And going towards the south, we have towards the south, we have Riverside Christian is at Franklin Classical, and you look at this one, Isaiah, and Classical just came off of a loss to Bowling Green, but they are against a team that is down to their third string quarterback who performed decently for what he was up against with CCS from what we saw, but it may not be enough to get past the FCS secondary because they've got fairly decent guys on the defensive line. They've got some firepower on the offense. So it's one of those difficult decisions, especially since they're down to their third string.
Yeah, well, FCS, we're missing 3 guys going into both-way starters going into the game last Friday. We haven't seen 2 guys on their secondary or their nose guard / center. Max DeBoard. A lot of injuries happened last week. And on the flip side, Riverside had some injury issues and, of course, not their quarterback playing. We'll see about Riley Hall. I think he'll be okay, but we'll have to see. But I think FCS is going to win this one at home.
Well, James, what do you got with this one?
I actually agree. I think that Riverside is going to show up despite losing Crutcher Rizel. I think that they'll be just fine. They'll have the guys step in that they need. I think Riley Hall will be back, and I think John Trahan is going to – because if you look at what Gage Holman did to Franklin Classical, I think John Trahan has the exact same capability to do the same thing. And here's the key for Riverside. If they're going to win, they have to be able to run the ball. John Knotts has to be able to get in that backfield now. On the flip side, though, like I said, I'm taking Classical on this one, and I think that of course they're going to be down Ernie McKinnon, but I think Josh Austin has a good pass rush. Caden Dickerson, just his motor does not stop going. I think if they could get Josh Salstron up and running, I think that would be a definite plus for them. But I do have Classical winning this one.
Yeah, and I'll just put in that I think this is definitely going to be a running-heavy game. It's going to be John Trahan versus Josh Austin and Caden Dickerson. I think both defenses are going to have a rough night stopping those guys, especially on the outside edge.
Yeah, and if Riley Hall is yeah, James, you had yours.
I'll also add this, though. It will be a lot of running like we saw last year. I mean, it was the first part of the game was the Cole Warren versus John Trahan show.
Yeah.
But I did see the touchdown pass for Riverside Friday night. I think if they can get that up and running, I know Caden Dickerson has his interception, but other than him, I think their corners are somewhat inexperienced. Maybe Josh Salstron can step up, like I said. But, if Riverside can get a little bit of a passing attack going, I think they'll open things up and soften things up. And then you go with the 1-2 punch of Riley Hall and John Trahan, and I think that works for them.
Yeah, and we'll see if there's also Riley Hall who's nursing his injuries as well. So if he can manage to get back into the game against FCS, that may be a game changer.
Well, yeah, FCS was also missing their corner, which in the Jamboree at least showed to be a great player. But we'll just have to see. I think it's going to be a good ball game, though, especially we're going to see probably a high-scoring game.
Yep, and we're looking forward to that, as well as the only other game, the first. So Riverside FCS is the first in-division game of the South of 2 that week. Of course, Bowling Green and Bowling Green Heat and Lighthouse Sacred Heart. Those are the first 2 in-division games we'll see for the North. But the second in-division game we're seeing in the South is Franklin Christian Academy is hosting the Lancaster Christian Academy Knights. So it's hard to tell how FCA is going to perform in this because they put up 50 points against Bowling Green, and they had a bye week to be able to regroup and refocus. But Lancaster, with the amazing start they had, they also, I think they potentially have Bragg out for their game. I don't know what the injury update is on that, but I think they may sit him out a week to go through the concussion protocol. So they'll be down their starting quarterback, but it's going to be hard to see because you've got the starting quarterback of Daniel Holcomb for FCA, and you've got some things to work with for your receivers and such. But for Lancaster, I think it's going to be one of those really tight games because of the numbers that are down on both sides.
Well, I think this is going to be the second game in fueling Lancaster's My prediction: 5-game winning streak coming up. I think Lancaster, although they did lose Bragg, he's a phenomenal player. I was excited to see him this year. We saw them reload like crazy on Friday. They could have put anybody in there at quarterback and had success in that system. They really knew how to move the ball. I don't think they'll have any issues at all against FCA's defense, especially their defensive line. I think they'll be able to run all over them all day. Had a lot of success in the running game. But the big question is, can you stop John Buchanan? That's going to be the question coming into this game. My guess is no, but I think that they're still going to pull it out.
Yep, so you got FCA on that one, James. Or
I
excuse me,
actually
you got
got
Lancaster. You got
excuse me.
Lancaster on that one, James.
Guys, it's hard to stop the John Buchanan train when it gets going. And I think that I liked what I saw out of Sonny Reed. If Daniel Holcomb can get healthy, I think FCA is going to have a shot. But I do have Lancaster on this one because you saw what they did with James Redding for the Tennessee Heat. Even with the Heat having in my opinion, having a decent offensive line, they still were able to handle Redding and hold him down. So I think that Lancaster is going to pick up the win in this one if John Buchanan does not get going. As far as Deuce Bragg, I think he's just going to, we're going to see how he feels this week. They'll probably make the call come Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, and that way they can throw in one of those backup quarterbacks that played so well Thursday night. But I do have Lancaster on this one.
All right, so both of you guys are sticking with Lancaster on that one, and you already went over Classical Riverside. Swanee, this is their last bye week before they have their road opener next
I'm
week.
excited to see Swanee.
Yeah, so we'll see what Swanee's firepower is next week. But the extreme game of the week, we don't have a drum roll sound effect. Somebody's giving it off. But the extreme game of the week, we're heading to Antioch. It's the Lighthouse Christian School Lions hosting the Sacred Heart of Jesus High School Knights for the Kingdom.com Extreme Game of the Week. We're excited to see what both of those teams have to offer for the 2018 football season. And we're excited to broadcast Lighthouse's home opener from Antioch, Tennessee. All right, that'll do it for Extreme Radio presented by GracePointe Healthcare. Go to GracePointeHealthcare.com, request your appointment online, and mention mention 8-Man Extreme, and you'll get $20 off your new patient office visit fee. GracePointe Healthcare, modern medicine the old-fashioned way. But on behalf of Isaiah Austin, Wayne Weathers, James Shannon, as well as thanks to Coach Judd Powers for getting in on the show. Thank you for tuning in today. We will see you on Friday for the Extreme Game of the Week, the Lions hosting the Knights.
See ya!